Chapter 1387. What Mrs. Brown said is actually correct. Alex has undergone tremendous changes since he was a child. He has experienced the best days in the world, and he has also experienced the hardest days. He has already looked down on everything. Even if he didn't marry Emma back then, even if he is still working on the construction site now, there is nothing dissatisfied with himself. Because in his opinion, after the death of his parents, working hard to live is the greatest comfort to them. As for money and status, he had already forgotten it. During the years he married Emma, he suffered humiliation, but he never thought of going back to Anderson's house for help. Even if his dignity was rubbed repeatedly by the Richard family on the ground, he could accept it calmly. For years of incomparable humiliation passed, but even though he himself was in the center of this vortex, he was the most peaceful one. But his calmness was completely changed because of Mrs. Brown's serious illness. At that time, he was too afraid of Mrs. Brown's death. Because, in his eyes, Mrs. Brown is his savior, his reborn parents, and his biological parents are already dead, so she must never watch her die. He once went to the hospital and wanted to do a match with Mrs. Brown, to see his kidneys, and he could successfully match with Mrs. Brown. If the matching is successful, he would simply donate a kidney to Mrs. Brown. However, the hospital told itself at the time that the matching failed. So, he could only do everything possible to get money to find the source of the kidney for Mrs. Brown and perform a kidney transplant. Because of this, he mustered up the courage to borrow money from Mrs. Richard during her birthday party. But unexpectedly, the Lady Richard not only rejected him mercilessly, but also took the entire Richard family to ridicule herself. At that time, Alex was frustrated. It was also at that time that Nolan suddenly appeared in front of him. The moment he saw him, his heart was very angry. Although he did not know that his parents were harmed by others, he always felt that the Anderson family could not shirk the blame for their parents' death. And Nolan, as the housekeeper of the Anderson family, can be said to be the one who made him hate the family. Therefore, when Nolan asked him to go home and inherit the family property, he refused. When Nolan gave him the Diamond Group and gave him $10 billion, he also refused. However, when Nolan told him that Mrs. Brown's illness still needed $2 million to save her life, he compromised. He knew that he had no other way to save Mrs. Brown apart from accepting the Anderson family's money. Therefore, he accepted the Diamond Group and the $10 billion cash given by the Anderson family. Since then, Alex's life trajectory has undergone a major reversal. However, he never thought that all of this was actually a bitter trick by Nolan and Mrs. Brown. A battle forced himself to accept Anderson family's gift or compensation tricks. At this moment, he had been deceived and even betrayed in his heart.